The first thing I noticed was the smell. Burnt coffee and cleaning fluid. That specific combination that only exists in diners at weird hours. My face was pressed against a laminate table, and for a second I just stayed there because moving seemed like a bad idea. My skull had this low, rhythmic ache going, like someone had replaced my brain with a metronome set slightly too slow. I pushed myself upright. The room tilted a little, then settled. I blinked a few times. Fluorescent lights, the kind that hum just below the frequency you can name but you feel it anyway. Booths along the windows, a counter with stools, a menu board with a couple of letters missing, standard Denny's. I recognized the layout the way you recognize a face you've seen 100 times without ever learning the name. Breezewood, Pennsylvania, the one off the turnpike, near the interchange. I knew this place. Kevin and I had stopped here twice on drives back from visiting his mom in Philadelphia. Bad pancakes, good coffee, open all night. That was about all I knew about it. I didn't know how I'd gotten here. That part I just set aside for a second. I was sitting up. That was progress. I looked around. There was a man at the counter, maybe 3 stools down from the end. He was wearing a polyester suit, wide lapels, flared trousers, a patterned shirt open at the collar, dark hair slicked back, thin mustache. The whole thing was very 1977. Not costume party 1977. Actual 1977. The fabric had that particular sheen that polyester gets when it's real and old, not the cheap stuff they sell at Halloween stores. He was just sitting there, both hands flat on the counter, not looking at anything. I figured maybe there was an event nearby, a themed thing, some kind of reunion. People do that. Then I looked at the booth to my left. A family, mom, dad, 2 kids. The dad had neatly parted hair, a square jaw, acid-wash jeans, and a bright neon windbreaker in a green that doesn't exist in nature. The mom had permed hair, big and voluminous, and a pastel pink windbreaker to match. High-top sneakers, white, on both of them. The kids were dressed the same way, all 4 of them sitting there, not talking, not eating, not looking at their phones, because there were no phones. Just sitting. Early 90s, specifically early 90s. Not just the fashion, but the precision of it. Nothing was off. Nothing was slightly wrong or slightly too new. It was like someone had taken a photograph from about 1991 and made it 3-dimensional. I looked back at the man at the counter, then at the family, then at the man again. The room felt wrong. I couldn't name why exactly. Not yet. It was more like a sound that's slightly off-pitch. You don't immediately know what's wrong, you just know something is. I looked down at the table. There was a coffee cup, still mostly full, gone cold. Next to it, a receipt. I picked it up. It was from that morning, dated, printed on that thin thermal paper that curls at the edges. Last meal deal, $8.99. I didn't remember ordering that. I didn't remember sitting down. I set the receipt back on the table. Under the condiment tray, the little plastic holder with the ketchup and the hot sauce and the sugar packets, there was a card. Laminated, the size of a business card but a little bigger, like one of those cards they put in hotel rooms that explains the checkout procedure. I pulled it out. Traveler's safety card was printed across the top in a plain font. Below that, 5 rules, numbered, laid out in short sentences. I read them. Then I read them again. I'm not going to pretend I understood them immediately because I didn't. But I read them carefully, which is maybe the one useful thing I did in the first 10 minutes of being awake in that place. Rule 1 was about staying in the dining room. Rule 2 was about the clock. Rule 3 was about purchasing 1 item for a stranger before 3 o'clock. Rule 4 was about the radio. Rule 5 was about the hole puncher. I looked up. There was a heavy iron hole puncher sitting right next to my coffee cup. The old kind, solid. The type that takes actual effort to press down. It looked like it belonged in a school supply closet in about 1985. I had no idea why it was there. I picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. The card was the only thing in the room that felt like it was meant for me specifically. That's a strange thing to realize. Everything else, the lights, the smell, the people in their frozen clothes, felt like it was just there, ambient, part of whatever the room was doing. But the card was tucked under the condiment tray like someone had placed it there on purpose, like they knew I'd be sitting at this particular table. I folded it once and put it in the front pocket of my jeans. I sat there for another minute, just taking stock. My jeans were dark, a little rumpled. Gray t-shirt, worn sneakers. I was dressed like I'd fallen asleep mid-trip, which I guess I had, except I didn't remember the trip. I patted my pockets. No phone, no wallet, no keys, nothing. Kevin would have had a comment about that. Something dry about how I couldn't keep track of anything. That's me, honestly. I lose things. I leave my keys in the door. I forget to charge my phone. Kevin used to say I'd lose my own head if it wasn't attached, and I'd say something like, "Good thing I have you to keep track of it," and he'd roll his eyes, and that was just how we were. I didn't let myself think too long about where Kevin was. I stood up. My legs were fine, which was something. The ache in my head had leveled out to a dull background thing, manageable. I pushed the coffee cup aside and looked at the clock on the wall above the counter. 2:50. The clock was one of those basic round ones with a white face and black numbers. The kind every diner has had since the beginning of time. It read 2:50 a.m. The second hand was moving. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the lights and a faint sound from the kitchen. Something low and mechanical, like a fan running. I looked at the man in the disco suit. He hadn't moved. I looked at the family in the booth. None of them had moved either. The kids weren't fidgeting, the dad wasn't checking his watch, the mom wasn't looking out the window. They were all just perfectly still, like someone had pressed pause. That part bugged me a little. I picked up the receipt one more time, looked at the date, set it back down. I left the hole puncher on the table. I didn't know what else to do with it, and the card had said something about it, but I hadn't worked out what yet. I figured I'd come back to that. The front exit was maybe 20 feet away. Glass door, push bar, the Denny's logo decals starting to peel at one corner. I could see the dark parking lot through it, and the Exxon sign across the street glowing orange. I walked toward the door, pushed through, and stepped into the bathroom. The bathroom was small. Single sink. One stall. A paper towel dispenser on the wall with the little red indicator showing empty. Fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The kind of bathroom that's been cleaned recently, but still looks like it hasn't. I stood there for a second. Just stood there. Then I turned around and pushed back through the door I'd come in from, which should have been the parking lot, and walked out into the dining room. Okay. I stood at the edge of the room and looked at the clock. Still 2:50. The second hand was still moving, so time hadn't stopped, it just hadn't done much. The man in the disco suit was still at the counter. The family was still in their booth. Nobody had moved. I probably looked insane, walking in from the bathroom with my arms out a little like I was waiting to catch something. The card had mentioned exits. I remembered that. I hadn't read it carefully enough the first time, or maybe I had and it just hadn't landed. Either way, I figured the front door wasn't a fluke. I figured I should check. The side exit was near the back of the room, past the booths, past a rack of those little tourist brochures for places nobody actually goes. Whitewater rafting, a corn maze, a hotel that called itself a resort. The door had a push bar and a small sign that said, "Emergency exit. Alarm will sound." It did not sound. I pushed through and stepped into the bathroom. Same bathroom, same empty paper towel dispenser, same buzz from the light. I went back out. The emergency door near the kitchen was through a short hallway that smelled like dish soap and something fried. There was a mop bucket against the wall. yellow, with a gray mop handle leaning out of it. The door at the end was heavier than the others, metal, with a long horizontal bar across it. I hit it with both hands and stepped through into the bathroom. I stood at the sink for a minute, ran the water. Cold. I looked at myself in the mirror, and honestly, I looked pretty rough. Pale, kind of hollow around the eyes, hair going in 3 directions. I looked like someone who'd been asleep in a Denny's and then walked into the same bathroom 4 times. Which, to be fair. I turned the water off and went back to the dining room. The clock said 2:50. The second hand was still moving. I did the math on that for a second, then decided not to. I stood near the end of the counter and read the card again. I'd left it on the table and had to walk back to get it, which felt a little embarrassing even though nobody was watching. Or maybe they were watching and just not showing it. I wasn't sure which was worse. Rule 3. Purchase 1 item for a stranger before 3 o'clock. That was it. That was the one that applied right now. The clock was at 2:50, the second hand was moving, and I had no exits. The building had made it pretty clear it wasn't going to let me out on my own terms, so 1 item, 1 stranger, before 3. I looked around the room. The man in the disco suit was at the counter. He hadn't moved, hadn't looked up, hadn't done anything. I didn't know his name then. I just knew he was sitting there in a brown polyester suit that had probably been expensive once, and that he wasn't someone I felt ready to approach. I don't know why. Just a feeling. The family in the booth, the dad in the neon windbreaker, the mom, the 2 kids. They were still frozen in that paused video way that had been bugging me since I woke up. I wasn't going to walk over there with a slice of pie and set it in front of a kid who wasn't blinking. There was a man in the far corner booth I hadn't really clocked before. He was big, not tall big, just broad, the kind of guy who takes up more than his share of a booth without trying. Gray-streaked beard, flannel shirt, a trucker's cap sitting on the table next to his coffee. He was looking at the table. Not at his phone, not at the window, just at the table. He looked like he'd been sitting there a long time and wasn't in a hurry to stop. I figured that was probably him. I went to the counter. Mary, her name tag said Mary, was standing at the far end doing nothing in particular. Not wiping the counter, not checking her order pad, just standing there facing slightly away from me. I sat down on one of the stools and waited. She walked over. Didn't look at me. Stood in front of me and waited. "Slice of cherry pie," I said. She turned, got the pie from the case, slid the plate across the counter, and walked back to where she'd been standing. Didn't ask if I wanted anything else, didn't write anything down, didn't look at me once. I picked up the plate. The pie looked fine. Normal diner cherry pie. The filling a little too red, the crust a little too thick. One of those pies that tastes exactly like you expect it to. There was a fork already on the plate. I carried it across the room toward the corner booth. The man didn't look up when I got close. I stopped at the edge of the table. "Hey," I said. "This is for you." He looked up then. Slow. He had deep-set eyes, dark, and a face that had been outside a lot. He looked at the pie, then at me, then back at the pie. I set it down. He didn't say anything. He reached out, pulled the plate toward him, and then reached into the front pocket of his flannel shirt. He set something on the table between us. Car keys, a plain ring, 2 keys, and a small rectangular fob, worn around the edges like they'd been in someone's pocket for years. He looked back at the pie. That was it. Transaction complete, apparently. I picked up the keys. They were heavier than I expected. The fob had a Subaru logo on it, the little star cluster thing, rubbed down to almost nothing. I stood there for another second, in case there was more. There wasn't. He'd already picked up the fork. I walked back through the dining room toward the front door. The door pushed open easy. Cold air hit me first. That specific highway exit cold, a little diesel in it, a little fast food grease. The parking lot was mostly empty, a semi idling at the far end, a few scattered cars, and across the 4-lane stretch of Route 30, right there at the Exxon station, a silver Subaru Forester sitting under the pump canopy lights. I stopped on the sidewalk. It was ours. Or it looked exactly like ours. Same color, that kind of flat silver that goes gray in bad light. Same body style. I couldn't see the plates from where I was standing, but I didn't really need to. The fob in my hand had a Subaru logo on it. I looked down at it. Looked back up at the car. Okay. I crossed the road. No traffic. Not a single car in either direction, which for a truck route off the turnpike at 3 in the morning was probably normal, but it still felt too quiet. My sneakers were loud on the asphalt. I got to the Exxon lot and walked up to the driver's side and just stood there for a second. The car was clean. Cleaner than ours usually was. Kevin always meant to vacuum it out and never did, and there was usually a layer of gas station receipts and empty water bottles on the back seat. This one had nothing. Just empty seats and that faint smell of someone else's air freshener when I pulled the door open. Vanilla, maybe. Faint. I got in. The seat was already adjusted right. That was a little much, honestly, but I didn't dwell on it. The key went in on the first try. Engine turned over quiet and smooth. The dash lit up. Gas tank was full. I sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel, looking out through the windshield at the Exxon sign buzzing overhead. The plan, such as it was to get to the Pennsylvania Turnpike entrance and get out of Breezewood entirely. Drive until I hit something real. A town, a hospital, another person who could tell me what was happening. Something. I pulled out of the Exxon lot and headed north on 30. The GPS unit on the dash came on by itself. I hadn't touched it. It showed a blue line heading toward the turnpike entrance, which was what I wanted, so I followed it. The road was empty. I passed a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Bob Evans, a Holiday Inn Express. The usual Breezewood cluster. I'd driven through this stretch probably a dozen times over the years, and it always looked the same. All those signs stacked up against each other like nobody could agree on how many restaurants one highway exit needed. I kept driving. The turnpike entrance should have been about a mile up. I passed the McDonald's again. I slowed down, looked in the rear view. The Bob Evans sign was behind me. I was pretty sure I'd just passed it going the other direction. I kept going. Burger King, Holiday Inn Express, McDonald's again. The same 4 signs, same order, same spacing between them. I'd gone maybe 2 miles and I was looking at the same quarter-mile of road on a loop. I pulled over. The GPS rerouted. New blue line, same destination. Turnpike entrance, 0.8 miles. I drove. McDonald's, Burger King, Bob Evans, Holiday Inn Express, McDonald's. I stopped again. Put it in reverse. Tried going back the way I'd come, back toward the Denny's, thinking maybe I could get out the other direction. The GPS recalculated immediately. New route. Still pointing me toward the toll plaza. I ignored it and kept reversing, then turned around and drove south. Past the Exxon. Kept going. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark, and then the McDonald's sign came up on the right side. I was heading south and the northbound signs were on my right. I pulled over again and sat with the engine running. Okay, so that was happening. I wasn't going to think about it too hard. The card had said the road loops. It hadn't said that exactly, but Rule 4 was about the radio, and Rule 4 existed for a reason, which meant someone had anticipated this exact situation. Someone had sat down and written out what to do when the road stopped cooperating. That wasn't a comfort exactly. It was just a fact. I kept driving. Figured I'd let it run. The same signs went past my windows again and again, and I stopped counting after about the 6th or 7th cycle. The GPS kept rerouting. I tried turning it off, and the screen just came back on. I tried changing the destination, and it wouldn't let me type anything. The little input field was grayed out. I left it alone. Then the billboard caught my eye. It was a big digital one, the kind that cycles through ads every few seconds. I'd passed it a bunch of times already without really registering it because it had been showing a mattress sale. But it changed while I was looking at it. The mattress ad dissolved and the new image came up, and I took my foot off the gas without meaning to. It was a hospital room. UPMC Presbyterian, it said across the top in that blocky blue font they use. I know that font. Kevin had a procedure there 2 years ago. Nothing serious. And I'd sat in that waiting room for 4 hours with a vending machine coffee and a Sports Illustrated from 2016. The image was a live feed. You could tell because the timestamp in the corner was moving. And in the bed, under a thin sheet, hooked up to a monitor and an IV line, was me. My face, my hair, same disheveled mess. My hands folded on top of the sheet, chest rising, falling, rising again. The monitor beside the bed showed a green line doing its steady rhythm. Whoever was in that bed was breathing on their own, at least. I pulled over completely and put it in park. I sat there and looked at the billboard. It was probably 50 feet up, big enough that I could see the details clearly. The room number above the door was 412. There was a chair pulled up next to the bed that had a jacket draped over the back of it, like someone had been sitting there recently. The sheet was the standard hospital kind, white with that thin blue stripe along the edge. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. Solid, real. The keys were in the ignition. The seat was under me. The windshield was in front of me. That was me in that bed. I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't do anything with it for a minute. Just sat there. The billboard cycled back to the mattress sale. I watched it go. Then it came back to the hospital room. Still the same. Chest still moving. Monitor still going. The radio came on. No warning. Volume at a normal level, like it had been on the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. But I'd been driving in silence for the last however long, so I'd noticed. Country roads, John Denver. The opening notes, that acoustic guitar figure, slow and clean. I knew what to do. Rule 4. The card had been specific. I didn't have to like it. I hit the brakes, put the car in park, and closed my eyes. The song played. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes shut. The road noise was gone. The engine was still running, but it sounded far away. The song went through the first verse, the chorus. I didn't sing along. I'm not really a sing-along person. I just waited. The chorus came back around. Then the outro. Then static. I opened my eyes. The car was idling in front of the Breezewood Interchange Toll Plaza. The booth was lit up ahead of me, that yellow-white fluorescent light spilling out through the window. The road behind me was just road. The signs were gone. The loop was gone. I sat there for a second, engine running, looking at the booth. Then I turned the car off, pulled the keys, and got out. The plaza's main office was a squat brick building off to the right of the booths. There was a sign above the door that said, Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, authorized personnel only, and the door was unlocked, which I figured meant either nobody cared or nobody was around to care. Probably both. Inside it smelled like old carpet and printer toner and something faintly sweet that I couldn't place. The lights were on, that flat overhead fluorescent kind that makes everything look a little sick. There was a front desk with nobody behind it, a rack of brochures about road conditions and rest stop locations, and a hallway that went back toward what looked like a break room. I was looking for a map, something that showed me where I actually was, relative to anything real. I don't know what I thought a map was going to tell me at this point, but it felt like a practical thing to do, and I was running low on practical things. The brochures were useless. Turnpike travel tips. Pennsylvania, state of independence. A laminated card about what to do if you hit a deer. I put that last one back. I went down the hallway. It was narrow and the carpet was that industrial gray-green color that exists only in government buildings and middle schools. A bulletin board on the left wall had a shift schedule pinned to it, mostly blank, and a few safety notices that looked like they'd been up for years. The paper was curled at the corners and the ink had faded to that washed-out purple color that old photocopies get. That's when I almost stepped on it. It was on the floor, face up, propped against the baseboard like someone had set it down carefully and then just never come back for it. A wooden plaque, the kind with a little brass plate and a photo mounted in the center. The kind they hang in the break room of every chain restaurant and regional office in America. Employee of the Month. I picked it up. The photo was Kevin. I stood there in that hallway for a second and just looked at it. It was definitely him. Same blonde hair, same round jaw. He was in a uniform I didn't recognize. A pale gray shirt with a turnpike commission patch on the shoulder. The kind of thing you'd wear in a toll booth. He was looking at the camera with this expression that wasn't quite a smile. Not unhappy, just tired. The kind of tired that's settled in so deep it doesn't really register as tired anymore. It just registers as a face. The brass plate said Kevin Estrada, and then the month and the year below it. The year was 5 years from now. I set the plaque back down on the floor. Then I picked it up again. I looked at the date a second time because I wanted to be wrong about it. I wasn't wrong about it. 5 years. I'm not going to say I had some big dramatic moment in that hallway. I didn't. I just stood there with a wooden plaque in my hands under a flickering fluorescent light and felt something slot into place in my chest, like a key turning. The kind of understanding that doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels like remembering something you already knew. Kevin had been here. Not here, like he'd stopped by. Here like he'd been working. For 5 years by the date on that plaque. Anchored to this interchange, to this booth, to this specific stretch of Pennsylvania highway that nobody actually wants to be on. Doing whatever it is you do when you're the gatekeeper of a place like this. Punching tickets, keeping the loop running, keeping the tether alive, keeping me alive. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? The billboard. My body in that hospital bed in Pittsburgh, chest going up and down under a thin sheet. That wasn't just a weird image the road threw at me. That was real. That was my actual body, somewhere, in a bed, still breathing. And it was still breathing because Kevin had been here, holding whatever thread connected that body to something for 5 years, alone, in a toll booth off the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I thought about something he said in the car, before the accident. We'd been on the highway for maybe 2 hours and traffic had slowed down for no visible reason, the way it does. And Kevin had gotten quiet in the way he gets when something is actually bothering him. I'd asked him what was wrong and he'd said, kind of offhand, that his worst nightmare was being stuck in traffic forever. Not dying, not anything dramatic. Just being in a car, on a highway, going nowhere, indefinitely. He'd laughed a little after he said it, like he was embarrassed by how mundane it was. That was it. That was the thing he'd said. And now here was his photo on a plaque on the floor of a turnpike office, dated 5 years from now, in a uniform. I don't know who decides these things. I don't know if anyone does. But that detail, that specific offhand, almost throwaway detail, had become his actual situation, his actual life, or whatever this was. The thing he was most afraid of, made literal and permanent and given a shift schedule, that bugged me, more than a little. I set the plaque down on the floor again, gently, and walked back out through the front door. The booth was maybe 30 feet away. I could see the light inside it, that same yellow-white fluorescent. I walked toward it slowly. Not because I was scared. I just wasn't in a hurry. I already knew what I was going to find. When I got close enough to see through the window, Kevin was there. He was sitting on a small stool, facing out toward the road, in that same gray uniform from the photo. His hands were in his lap. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting. He looked different. I mean, It was him. I knew it was him immediately, the way you know someone you've shared a car and an apartment and 4 years of your life with. But he looked different. The edges of him weren't quite right. His outline was a little soft. His hands, when I looked at them, were almost transparent in places, the way a plastic bag looks when you hold it up to light. His hair was the same color, but it looked thin. His face was the same face, but it looked like a copy of a copy. Still him, but fading. He turned and looked at me through the glass. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who had been waiting for a specific bus for a very long time and had just watched it pull up. He looked tired. He looked relieved. He looked like both of those things at the same time, which I didn't know was possible until I saw it on his face. I stood there on the other side of the glass and looked at him, and he looked at me, and neither of us said anything for a second. There wasn't a lot to say. I understood now why I was here. I understood what the card had been leading me toward, what the pie and the keys and the song and all of it had been about. A path with one destination. I'd just been walking it without knowing where it went. I understood what needed to happen next. I stepped up to the window. The glass was fogged near the bottom from years of breath and cold air. I could see the little metal tray in the slot, the kind where you slide cash through and get your change back. There was a stool inside, a cup of pens, a clipboard hanging on a nail. The whole space was maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, which I know because I stood there measuring it with my eyes the way you do when you're trying not to think about something else. Kevin was watching me through the glass. I put my hand up and knocked twice on the frame. Not hard, just enough. He slid the window open. The air that came out was stale and warm and smelled like the inside of a car that's been parked in the sun too long. I don't know what I expected. Something more dramatic, maybe. It just smelled like a place where a person had been sitting for a very long time. "Hey," I said. "Hey." His voice was quiet, a little rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. We looked at each other for a second. I didn't know how to start, so I just started. "It's time," I said. He nodded once, slow. He already knew. He'd probably known the second he saw me walk up, or maybe before that. Maybe from the moment the loop started cycling again and a silver Subaru pulled into the lot. Maybe he'd been watching the whole time. I don't know. I didn't ask. What I noticed was that he didn't argue, didn't ask if I was sure, didn't do any of the things I'd half expected, the things I'd been bracing for during the whole walk from the office. He just nodded and reached under the counter and picked up a set of keys and set them on the tray. Then he stood up off the stool, which took him a second, like his legs had forgotten how. He came around through the door on the side of the booth. I hadn't even noticed there was a door. It was just part of the wall until it opened. He stepped out and I stepped in, and we passed each other in the gap, which was maybe 2 feet wide. His shoulder went past my shoulder. He felt less solid than I expected. Not like bumping into a ghost in a movie. Just lighter, like bumping into someone who hasn't eaten in a while. That was the closest I could get to it. I turned around inside the booth and looked out through the glass at the highway. The view was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete ramp, yellow lane markings, dark sky. A row of orange lights on poles running up toward the turnpike. Nothing interesting, just a job. I heard Kevin's footsteps behind me, slow and even, moving away across the lot. I didn't turn around to watch him go. I don't know why. It just felt like the wrong thing to do. Like watching someone walk into a changing room. Some things you just give people. I sat down on the stool. It was the right height, which was a weird thing to notice. The clipboard had a shift log on it. The top entry was dated 5 years back. Kevin's handwriting. I recognized it from grocery lists and birthday cards. And a note he'd once left on the bathroom mirror that said, "We're out of shampoo," in letters so big you could read it without your glasses. Same handwriting. Neat and a little cramped. like he was always trying to fit more on the page than there was room for. I set the clipboard back on the nail. Then I heard it. Behind me, out in the lot. The sound of a car engine, but not a normal one. More like a sound that was also a feeling, low and grinding and wrong in a specific way I recognized without wanting to. I turned around. The Subaru was gone. What was sitting in its place was something I'd seen before, except I hadn't seen it, because I'd been unconscious when it happened. But I knew what it was anyway. The front end was folded in like a piece of paper someone had crumpled and then tried to flatten back out. The windshield was gone, just a frame with some glass teeth left in it. The driver's side door was caved inward. One headlight was pointing at the ground. The other one was on, and it was the only light on the whole car, and it was flickering. It was our car. It was the car from the night of the accident. Kevin was sitting in the driver's seat. I don't know how he got in. I don't know how the car changed. I'd stopped asking those kinds of questions about an hour ago, which is probably the only reason I was still functional. I just watched him pull the wreck forward, slow and careful, the frame scraping a little against the concrete until the driver's window was level with the booth window. He rolled it down. The window still worked, which seemed wrong given the state of everything else. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ticket. I'd seen transit tickets before, the paper kind, the ones they used to use on buses and trains before everything went digital. This one was crumpled and dark at the edges, and there was a stain on it that I didn't look at too closely. He held it out through the window, and I took it from him. It was damp. I set it on the counter. I looked at the counter. The hole puncher was sitting right there, the same one from the Denny's table, the same one I'd carried out of there without knowing why, the way you sometimes grab something on your way out the door and only figure out what you needed it for later. Heavy iron, black handle, same small dent on the side near the base. I picked it up. I lined up the ticket under it, centered it, which was a weird instinct to have in that moment. But I did it anyway. I wanted it to be right. I wanted the hole to be in the middle. I pressed down. The punch went through clean. One clean hole right in the center of the ticket. The little circle of paper fell into the tray underneath. I lifted the puncher back up and set it on the counter. That was it. I slid the ticket back through the slot. Kevin took it. He looked at it for a second, then he looked at me. His eyes were the same pale blue they'd always been, except they looked clearer than they had through the glass. Less fogged, like something had lifted. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. He put the car in drive. I watched it go. Up the ramp slow at first, then faster, the single working headlight cutting a line up the concrete. The scraping sound faded. The orange lights on the poles went past it one by one. And then, at the top of the ramp, where the turnpike entrance should have been, there was just white. Not a light, exactly. Just the absence of dark. The car went into it, and the white closed behind it, and the ramp was empty. I stood there with my hand on the counter and the hole puncher next to my hand and the little paper circle still sitting in the tray. Kevin Estrada was gone. I already knew what that meant. Not in a complicated way. In a very simple, very plain way. The way you know a door is locked before you try the handle. You just know. I sat back down on the stool. The fluorescent light above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. The clipboard hung on its nail. The cup of pens was next to the window. The metal tray was empty now. I looked out at the highway. In the distance, maybe a mile out, there was a cluster of headlights. Moving steady. Moving toward me. I set the hole puncher on the counter in front of me. Handle toward me, the way you'd set a tool you were going to need again soon. I straightened up on the stool. I waited. The headlights were maybe a mile out. Hard to tell exactly. The highway does something to distance at night. Flattens it, makes everything feel closer or farther than it actually is. I'd noticed that even before all this. before Breezewood, before the Denny's, before any of it. Kevin and I used to drive at night sometimes just to drive, and I'd always lose track of how far things were in the dark. I thought about that for a second. Then I stopped thinking about it. The booth was small. I mean, I already knew that. I'd been standing in it, I'd handed the ticket back, I'd watched the car go. But sitting down made it more real somehow. The walls were maybe 4 feet apart. The window was a sliding panel, scratched up, with a rubber gasket around the edge that had started to peel on one corner. There was a small shelf below the window with a rubber mat on it, the kind with the little raised circles worn flat in the middle where someone had been resting their forearm for a long time. Kevin's forearm. Years of it. I put my own arm there. It fit. The stool had a thin cushion on it, the vinyl kind, dark blue, cracked along one seam. There was a strip of duct tape over the crack. Someone had done that carefully, straight line, pressed down at the edges. I don't know why that got to me a little, but it did. That somebody had bothered. The clipboard was still on its nail. I reached over and took it down. There were forms on it, the kind with carbon paper, the kind that makes copies. The top form had a date on it that I didn't recognize. Not a date that had happened yet, as far as I knew. The column headers were things like entry time and vehicle class and clearance status. There were rows of them, most filled in with neat handwriting. Kevin's handwriting, I recognized it. He always printed, never cursed, kept his letters small and even. I'd made fun of him for it once, said it looked like a pharmacist's handwriting. He'd said that was a compliment. The last filled row was blank in the clearance status column. I figured that was ours. The ticket I'd punched. I found a pen in the cup, a regular Bic blue cap still on, and wrote cleared in the column. I don't know if that was required. It felt right. I put the clipboard back on the nail. The headlights were closer now. I could see there were 3 vehicles. The front one was a pickup. Domestic. Dark-colored. Moving at a pretty normal highway speed. The second was a sedan of some kind. The third was harder to make out. Bigger. Maybe an SUV. They were spaced out the way you get when people have been driving for a while and stopped tailgating each other. Comfortable distance. Tired distance. I knew what they were going through, not the specifics. I didn't know their specifics any more than Kevin had known mine when I walked into that Denny's. But I knew the general shape of it. Woke up somewhere that didn't make sense. Found a card with rules on it. Tried the exits. Ended up somewhere they didn't expect. Spent some amount of time, minutes, hours. I still wasn't sure how time worked here. Trying to figure out what the place wanted from them. And now, they were coming to the booth. I thought about what Kevin had looked like when I came up to the window. Tired. Translucent at the edges, like a photocopy of a photocopy, but steady. Present. He'd known what he was doing, even if it had cost him everything to keep doing it. He hadn't been frantic. He hadn't been dramatic about any of it. I could do that. I'm not a naturally calm person. Kevin would tell you that, or he would have. But I can be steady when I need to be. That's probably the most useful thing about me, honestly. I don't fall apart in the moment. I fall apart later, quietly, in a car or a bathroom or somewhere nobody's watching. But in the moment, I'm okay. There wasn't going to be a later anymore, so I figured I was fine. The pickup was close enough now that I could hear the engine, a low diesel sound. It slowed as it approached the gate, the headlights sweeping across the front of the booth, and I had to look away for a second. When I looked back, the truck had stopped at the window. The driver was a man, maybe 50, wearing a Carhartt jacket and a hat with a mesh back. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like he'd been trying to figure something out for a while and hadn't gotten there yet. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Hey," he said. His voice was careful, the way you talk when you're not sure what the rules are. "Hey," I said back. He glanced at the booth, at the clipboard, the cup of pens, the hole puncher sitting on the counter. He looked back at me. I've been driving this stretch for... He stopped, shook his head a little. I don't know how long. The signs keep saying Breezewood. Yeah, I said. They do that. He was quiet for a second. Am I... Another stop. He was trying to figure out how to ask the question without asking the question. I understood that. I'd done the same thing in the Denny's reading that card, trying to find the version of the question that didn't have the answer I was afraid of. You're okay, I said. You're going to be okay. There's a process. It takes a little while, but there's a card. You'll find a card if you haven't already. And it tells you what to do. You follow the steps, and you get through. He looked at me for a long moment. You went through it? Yeah, and you're... He looked at the booth again, at me sitting in it. I'm here, I said. That's what I am now. I'm here. He nodded slowly. I don't think he fully understood it yet. That was fine. He didn't need to understand it yet. He just needed to know there was someone at the window, that the booth wasn't empty, that somebody was going to be here when he came back through after he'd done whatever the place needed him to do. I tore off one of the carbon forms from the clipboard, the blank ones at the bottom, and I wrote down the 5 rules from memory. I'd read them enough times. I slid the paper through the window. He took it, read it, looked up at me. Rule 3, he said, before 3 o'clock. Check the clock when you get inside, I said. You'll have time. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. Thanks, he said, like I'd given him directions to a gas station. Normal, practical. Yeah, I said. He pulled forward. The gate arm went up. I hadn't touched anything, it just went up. And the truck moved through and turned toward the Denny's. The sedan pulled up next. A woman, younger, with a phone mount on her dash that was showing an error screen. I wrote out another set of rules while she was pulling up. The SUV after that was a family. 2 adults in front, a kid asleep in the back seat. I wrote the rules a 3rd time. My handwriting was getting a little faster, a little more automatic. I'd find a rhythm eventually. Kevin had found one. The duct tape on the stool cushion said so. After the 3rd car pulled through, the highway was empty again. Dark and flat and quiet. The fluorescent light above me hummed. It didn't flicker anymore. It had settled into a steady buzz, the kind you stop hearing after a while. I put the pen back in the cup. I straightened the clipboard on its nail. I looked out at the highway. There'd be more headlights eventually. There always would be. That was the whole point of the place. That was the whole point of me being in it. I wasn't scared. That surprised me a little. But it was true. I'd been scared in the Denny's, scared on the road, scared standing in front of Kevin's window with the ticket in my hand. But sitting here, in the booth, with the hole puncher in front of me and the cup of pens and the worn-down rubber mat, I wasn't scared. Kevin had kept me alive for 5 years from this exact spot. 5 years of forms and carbon paper and sliding rules through a scratched-up window to people who didn't know what was happening to them. He'd done that because it was what there was to do. Now, it was mine to do. I settled back on the stool. The vinyl creak was the only sound for a while. Then, way out on the highway, a single point of light appeared in the dark, moving steady, moving toward me. I picked up the pen.